Okay, fifth graders, you had your note cards on your way in, and I want you to put them face down and do not read them. Don't share them with anybody. We're going to work with them a little bit later. And while you're getting settled, go ahead and look at what we're going to be working on today. And if you guys can see, we're going to be learning about metaphors and analogies. And we're going to get into all about that and teach you what that means, and we're going to work with them a little bit today. Remember a couple days ago, we read our earthquake terror. What happened in chapter 7? What finally happened that we've been waiting for?
The earthquake, and they're trapped.
Happened. Okay, so now what I want us to do is, we're going to talk a little bit about analogies. And in chapter 7, there was a ton of analogies. And you guys may have not known that, but now we're going to talk about what some of those analogies were. So before we get started, who knows anything about analogies? You guys think of anything or know an example of one? Maybe what it means? Just a guess if you don't know. Faith?
You say stuff like blank is to blank, like you use like and as.
Like and as. So you're comparing things, right? Comparing and contrasting. Can anybody think of an example of an analogy that you might know or maybe you think is like one? Any ideas? It's okay if not. We're going to get into it a little bit later. So what I want you to do is flip over your note card, but before you do, don't show it to anybody. Don't say it out loud. Read it to yourself. And then on the back, what I want you to do is write down what you think it means. Write down your ideas about the question, and if you're not sure, you can ask me, call me over, but take a couple minutes and you guys can write down what you think your analogy means. All right, fifth graders, go ahead and wrap up your last sentence, put a period at the end of it, and put your pencils down. All right, so I want to ask two of you what your ideas were. Mackenzie, can you share with me first what your analogy was on the front and then what your ideas are?
How is a stoplight like an alarm clock?
Stoplight and alarm clock. Okay, what did you write down for that? What did you think that were some similarities between them?
It tells you when to go, or it's like alarm clock tells you when to wake up. So when to start.
So maybe it gets you starting, it gets you going, okay?
Which then keeps control of things, so you're not late, or so traffic doesn't hit each other.
Awesome! I didn't even think about that one. That is a great idea. Does anybody else have any ideas?
They both use electricity.
They both use electricity. Oh my gosh, you guys have got this down. Electricity. All right. And Whitney, what was yours? Can you read it for me and tell me what your examples are?
How is a student like a computer?
Students and computers.
And I said students have to remember a lot of things like fractions, spelling, and multiplication.
So remembering a lot.
And computers have to do the same thing.
So maybe when you're on a computer and you're trying to find something,
like the desktop,
like on the
documents.
desktop. Or if you're working maybe using the calculator, you punch it in and it's got to know all that stuff, right? What about like if you're searching for something and you know something? Do students do that too? So now I'm going to go ahead and erase this. We're still comparing and contrasting, so we're still looking at similarities of things, right? Which is an example of our analogy. So I'm going to give you guys one more, and I want you guys, after I write it down, to take a couple minutes and with your Turn and Talk partners, talk about how these two things are similar. So we have a cloud and cotton candy. Now some of those might be kind of easy. You might think of one thing right off the bat, but I want you guys to think about, tell me just a couple things and I want you to just use popcorn method. Just say it out loud. What are some ways that cotton candy and clouds are alike?
Go fluffy.
They are fluffy.
Different shapes.
Different shapes. What else?
Change colors.
Different colors. Nice. When there's a sunset maybe, and have you guys ever seen like pink clouds before? It looks like cotton candy, right? What else? Can you guys think of anything else? You guys think, are they both pretty light?
Yeah.
And clouds are, I mean, they're just kind of up in the air. They're not really doing anything, but cotton candy's pretty light, isn't it? Maybe they're really light.
They both contain things.
Explain that a little bit. What kind of things do they contain?
Cotton candy contains
sugar,
and clouds contain rain.
And clouds
Dust
contain
particles.
And dust particles, sure.
And dust particles. they both contain things. Good job. You guys did an awesome job with that. Okay, so I want to go back to analogies one more time before we move on, because we're going to talk about one more thing. So analogies are comparing two things that have similarities. What a metaphor is? Anybody have any thoughts or guesses?
Come on, teacher's pet.
I have an example.
What's an example?
The wind sounds like an ogre snoring.
An ogre snoring. Explain that. How's an ogre snore?
Ogres aren't real.
Okay, that's why it's a metaphor. You're using it to explain something else by comparing it to something else, if that makes sense.
Okay, so you're using two different things and you're trying to compare them together, right? So another way that I like to explain how a metaphor is used is like a saying. And have you ever been talking to somebody, maybe your mom, your dad, your grandparents, and they'll say something, you're like, what does that mean? I'm like, oh, that's just a saying. Have you guys ever heard someone say that? So what about the expression, I'm gonna use my blue pen for this. How about this one? I feel blue.
Sad.
Does that mean I feel sad, right? You guys have all heard that one. And obviously, it doesn't mean that I don't turn around and I'm blue all of a sudden, right? I mean, that'd be kind of freaky if that could happen.
Like
No,
an
I feel
Oompa Loompa.
blue. I'd be like an Oompa Loompa or like an ogre. But that's a metaphor. Because if I'm not really turning blue, but I'm saying, yeah, I'm really, really sad, that's an example of a metaphor. So it's taking something and putting something that's not really realistic to it, but trying to add meaning to it. Exactly, because wind can't actually sound like an ogre snoring, but an ogre snoring would be really loud. So what does that imply that the wind is like?
Really loud.
Exactly. Nice, Landon. Yes, Faith is
Thank you,
beautiful
teacher.
like a flower. Because if you look at Faith, she doesn't have petals coming out of her head, right?
No,
But flowers are really pretty. And Faith is very pretty. Nice job. Good connection. All right. So let's go ahead and go back and we're going to review over these one more time and then we're going to move on. So analogies are what? What's the difference between an analogy and a metaphor?
comparing.
A metaphor, you're comparing something real to something that's not necessarily realistic, like the flowers and
Like you can't be blue.
Right. So it's taking something and putting it towards a unrealistic saying, but applying it to something that's actually real, like faith or like the wind or being sad. So what about an analogy? What's like an analogy? Remember, there's similarities between two things, right? So like a computer and a student. So analogies and metaphors, they add a lot to your writing. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to become writers. And in your writer notebook, you guys are going to write down stories and you're going to add metaphors. You guys put yourself as an earthquake. You guys are an earthquake. And so what I want you guys to think about is if you are the earthquake and you're coming into this big city and you're coming in and you're big and you're loud and you're mad, what are you going to act like? So I want you guys to take a couple minutes and I want you guys to write down some words about how you think as an earthquake you're coming into a city and what you're going to act like. Think of words. You can go back to the notes that you wrote down earlier and take a couple minutes. So what are some words that you can think of? If you're an earthquake coming in, how are you going to be acting? What are some words you guys think of? Just say them out loud.
Destruction.
Destruction.
Out of control. Deadly.
Deadly. Ooh, that's
Angry.
a good one.
Unstoppable.
Angry. Does
Powerful.
anybody else have any other ideas?
Aggressive.
Aggressive. That's a good one, right? And remember in the book when Jonathan and Abby were talking about how the storm was coming in and it was so big and powerful? That can be a word like aggressive, and then it comes in and you just don't know what to do. It's out of control, right? What are some other words?
fierce, violent.
Violent. And I'm actually going to add violent over to deadly, because those words kind of go hand in hand. Any others? Mackenzie, did you think of any?
They said all mine.
They said all yours. Okay, so we all have a pretty general idea of what you'd be as an earthquake. So if you're coming in, you're going to be fierce, aggressive, deadly, violent, and angry. And I'm glad that you guys brought up the words like aggressive and angry, because the lesson segment that we've been talking about is nature's fury and how nature can sometimes be furious and angry. So you wouldn't necessarily look at an earthquake and think they're going to come in and it's going to be peaceful. No, it's coming in and it's going to disrupt a town, right? It's going to break things down and maybe cause some chaos, right? People are not going to know what to do, and just like Jonathan and Abby in the book. Now that you guys put yourself in the shoes of an earthquake. Hold on a minute. Did you guys actually put yourself in the shoes of an earthquake?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, the earthquake wears shoes?
No.
So what was that?
Metaphor.
It's a metaphor! Oh my gosh, you guys got it. Putting yourself in the shoes of an earthquake, because earthquakes can't wear shoes. If they could, that'd be kind of weird. So you guys put yourselves in the shoes of an earthquake. You were the earthquake, and you described how you would be acting. So now we're going to talk about nature as a whole. We're talking about nature's fury. So sometimes you think about earthquakes, maybe hurricanes or tsunamis. Those are examples of a furious type of nature, a nature that comes in and causes destruction or chaos. But I want you guys to take a couple minutes with your Turn and Talk partners, and I want you to write down some ideas of how nature can be furious and angry, or how it can be peaceful. Now this can go beyond just weather. You can talk about animals, maybe talk about trees or plants, whatever you guys can think of outside, out in nature, how it can be peaceful and how it can be angry. Take a couple minutes and then we'll come back together.
The ocean.
All right, fifth graders, looks like you have some really good ideas. So let's first talk about peaceful. How can nature be peaceful? What are some examples of things outside in nature that are peaceful and
The
calm?
ocean at times can be very calm and
The
smooth.
ocean. Okay, so I want to ask you a question. Do you guys think the ocean, it can be peaceful? If you're on the shore and you hear the waves, it's nice and quiet. But can it be angry as well?
Mhm.
So what's an example of when it's angry?
In the storm.
Storms and tsunamis, right?
Cyclones.
And cyclones.
Or sharks in the ocean.
Sharks in the ocean. And that goes back to animals, right?
Yeah.
Storms. Do you guys think of anything else?
I said it's peaceful when you can hear the wind through the trees.
When you can hear the
But the
wind.
wind can be deadly too.
How can the wind be deadly or
It
angry?
can knock over trees.
Hurricane.
Twisters, tornadoes.
Knock things over.
Pick things up.
So we'll put on here hurricanes. Because they have really
Blow
strong
smoke
winds.
over.
And tornadoes.
Pick.
Anything else? What about anything else for peaceful?
When during springtime new babies are born from the animals.
Okay, so
and
when
they're
baby
all
animals.
coming out and
Right, because
playing.
they're cute to look at, right? So
Birds.
we'll put baby
But
animals.
some animals eat their newborns. That's not,
And that's not very peaceful, is it?
I think I do. I've heard that before.
So now we've talked about different types of nature, peaceful nature and angry nature, and certain things that can be peaceful. So maybe the sunshine can be peaceful, the ocean, wind, baby animals, but then there's other examples of how it can be angry and fierce. And that's what we've been talking about in our book is nature's fury. So now you guys can make connections to how nature's fury is really a metaphor. You guys ever heard that expression before? Calm before the storm. What does that mean?
it's going to be really calm and then the storm's going to come and it's going to get really violent.
Mhm.
Really fast.
Now I've heard this word used before when it's describing storms, like actually maybe an earthquake, but have you ever heard it used in any other way?
A relationship.
A relationship? Describe that a little bit.
Suddenly it can be all calm, but then it can be like a storm really fast.
So maybe it's really good in the beginning, things are happy, but then all of a sudden something happens and then a storm hits.
Mhm.
And it can happen really quickly, right? Faith, were you going to say something?
Oh, it's about storms.
What
Like
about
an
storms?
actual storm, like the eye of a storm, it's really, really calm, and then that's when it's gonna get really, really fierce.
Right. And what kind of storm is that in? You guys know? The eye of the
blizzards.
storm?
It's in blizzards and
Blizzards,
Hurricanes.
hurricanes, right. So the
Like
bigger
the day
the
after
eye, the bigger
tomorrow.
the storm. Exactly, just like that movie. So this expression was used by Jonathan in the book. And you guys remember what he was talking about when he was saying the calm before the storm? Meaning that right before the storm hit, it was nice and it was sunny outside, and then all of a sudden it started to get dark. And not actually turn into night, but what did he mean when it got dark out? What do you guys think he meant by that?
The
Clouds
storm
came
was
in.
coming.
They changed colors. And what about the calm? He said, remember when he was describing how it just became silent?
Give you
The wind
goosebumps.
stopped blowing.
The wind stopped blowing. So maybe right before something bad happens, you guys get that feeling right before something bad's gonna happen. You kind of get that feeling like, oh,
The
you feel
hair
like
stands up
something's
on your skin.
yeah. So that can also be an example of calm before the storm, which is an example of what? A metaphor. Exactly. So open up your writer's notebooks and get a pen or a pencil. And what you're going to be doing is you are going to be doing a write-up on chapter 7. Now what I want you guys to think about is go back to what we were talking about earlier about analogies and metaphors. Again, you guys are going to put yourselves in the shoes of an earthquake. So you guys are going to be the earthquake, but what I want you to do is do a write-up on that. So I want you to do a write-up on chapter 7, talk about when the earthquake came. I want you to use details, and I want you to describe how you as the earthquake are coming after Jonathan and Abby. Describe your characteristics, describe maybe how you're acting, angry, fierce. Use a couple analogies and some metaphors in there, but I want you to use details from the chapter. And if you guys can't remember, pull back out your books and use that. Okay, 5th graders, go ahead and stop with your writing. I want you to put your writer notebooks away. And before we pack up and get ready to go today, we are going to do one last thing. I've got this little wad of jewels here, and I'm going to throw it to you. Once you catch it, I want you to tell me one thing that you learned today that you did not know.
Oh geez. That you can use non-real, not real items to describe real things.
Okay, so you can use not real things to describe other things, and which is an example of which one?
Metaphor.
A metaphor.
I didn't know what a metaphor was before today, and I learned how to do a metaphor.
And you learned how to use them. Nice job.
I learned that when you're trying to make an analogy, it's best to find the comparisons first. So it'll help you.
So you find similarities when you're looking at analogies. Nice job. And last one.
I also learned about metaphors and
Yeah.
comparing them.
Good job.